The ink on the check was still wet when my father handed it to my brother Julian. $300,000. That was the price of a single evening of champagne, silk flowers, and ego-stroking for the golden child. Meanwhile, my bank account sat at a staggering -$42, and my mailbox was overflowing with final notices and threats of legal action. I had spent years being the invisible son, the one who worked 3 jobs to put himself through a state college while Julian was given a free ride to an Ivy League school he eventually dropped out of. But as I watched my father pat Julian on the back, telling him he deserved the very best for his big day, something inside me didn't just break. It evaporated. I realized then that I was never going to be part of this family's future, so I decided to take a piece of their past to fund my own. Growing up in our house was like living in a theater where only one actor ever got any stage time. Julian was 3 years younger than me, but in our parents' eyes, he was light years ahead in importance. If Julian got a B on a test, it was a cause for a celebratory dinner because he tried so hard. If I pulled an all-nighter to maintain my 4.0 GPA, it was simply expected and barely acknowledged with a grunt. My father, Arthur, was a man of cold precision and high standards for everyone except Julian. My mother was his silent enabler, a woman who believed that keeping the peace meant letting Julian have whatever he wanted while I filled the gaps they left behind. The disparity grew more extreme as we reached adulthood. I moved out at 18, knowing that if I stayed, I would eventually be nothing more than a servant to Julian's whims. I took out student loans, worked in warehouses until my back screamed, and survived on instant noodles for years. I was proud of what I built, even if it was modest. But then life happened. A medical emergency involving a ruptured appendix led to complications, leaving me with a mountain of debt that my meager insurance wouldn't cover. I was drowning. I was working 60 hours a week and still falling behind. When I finally swallowed my pride and went to my father for help, it was the most humiliating day of my life. I sat in his mahogany-paneled office, the room smelling of old paper and expensive tobacco. I told him I needed $50,000 to clear my medical bills and keep my apartment. I told him it was a loan, that I would pay every cent back with interest. He didn't even look up from his ledger. He told me that life was about hard lessons and that if he bailed me out now, I would never learn the value of a dollar. He told me he worked for everything he had and that I should do the same. 2 weeks later, the family gathered for Sunday dinner. That was when the announcement was made. Julian had proposed to his girlfriend of 3 months, a woman who shared his penchant for spending money she hadn't earned. My father stood up, beaming with a pride he had never once directed at me, and announced that he was gifting Julian $300,000 for the wedding. He said he wanted his youngest son to start his new life with a bang, not a whimper. He talked about legacy, about family honor, and about the importance of a grand celebration. I sat there, the taste of dry chicken like ash in my mouth. I looked at Julian, who was already talking about hiring a celebrity DJ and flying in orchids from overseas. Not once did he look at me. Not once did my father acknowledge that he had just denied his eldest son a lifeline while tossing a fortune at a one-day party. That was the night I stopped being a son and became a ghost. My father's pride and joy wasn't his children. It was his collection. In a climate-controlled vault in the basement of our family home, he kept a hoard of rare vintage watches and high-grade numismatic coins that he had been accumulating for 40 years. He spent more time cleaning those watches and cataloging those coins than he ever spent talking to me. He valued those inanimate objects more than my health, my stability, or my future. To him, that collection was his real legacy. He often bragged that it was worth well over $1 million, a safety net he would never touch because he loved the power of owning it. I knew the code to the vault. He had given it to me years ago when he needed me to move some boxes while he was on a business trip. He had never changed it because he assumed I was too terrified of him to ever step out of line. He thought my obedience was a personality trait, not a survival mechanism. He was wrong. The week before Julian's lavish rehearsal dinner, my parents went away for a weekend retreat to de-stress from the wedding planning. Julian was out at his bachelor party, likely blowing through another few thousand of our father's money. I had the house to myself. My hands didn't even shake when I punched in the code. The vault door hissed open, revealing the velvet-lined drawers and the soft glow of the security lights. I didn't take everything. I wasn't greedy, and I wasn't stupid. I knew exactly which pieces were the most liquid and the hardest to track through private sales. I took 4 Patek Philippe watches, a series of gold St. Gaudens double eagle coins, and a handful of rare silver dollars. These were items he hadn't audited in months. To the naked eye, the collection still looked full, but the heart of its value was now sitting in a padded gym bag on my shoulder. I had already done the legwork. Through various forums and private connections I'd researched for weeks, I found collectors who dealt in cash and didn't ask questions about provenance for items of this caliber. I spent the next 3 days driving across 3 states. I met a man in a high-end hotel lobby in Chicago. I met another in a private office in St. Louis. By the end of the week, I had $420,000 in a new, private bank account that my family didn't even know existed. I didn't just pay my medical debt. I paid off my student loans. I paid my rent for a year in advance. And then, I did something I should have done a long time ago. I quit my job, packed my belongings, and signed a lease on a small, beautiful apartment in a city 500 miles away. I changed my phone number and deleted my social media. The day of the wedding arrived. I didn't go. Instead, I sat on my new balcony, sipping a coffee I could finally afford, and waited. The explosion happened midway through the reception. I know this because my mother, in a state of sheer panic, tried to call my old number 50 times before finally sending an email to my school address that I hadn't yet deactivated. It turns out my father had intended to make a grand gesture at the wedding. He had planned to bring out one of the Patek Philippe watches I had taken to present to Julian as a wedding gift in front of all 300 guests. When he went to the vault that morning to retrieve it, he finally realized the scale of what was missing. He didn't just find one watch gone, he found the holes where his most prized possessions had been. He didn't call the police immediately because he was terrified of the scandal. He didn't want the wealthy guests to know that his fortress had been breached. He tried to play it cool, but by the time the reception started, he was a broken man. The money he had given Julian for the wedding was supposed to be a surplus, but without the liquidity of his collection, he was suddenly staring at a very different financial reality. The email from my mother was frantic. She accused me of being a monster. She said my father was having chest pains and that I had ruined Julian's most important day. She demanded I return the items immediately or they would call the authorities. I replied with a single sentence, "Money doesn't grow on trees, and I've finally learned the value of $1. I knew they wouldn't call the police. To do so would mean admitting that their son had outsmarted them. It would mean a public investigation into my father's tax records regarding the collection, something I knew he was terrified of. More importantly, it would mean acknowledging that he had pushed me to this point. He had told me to find a way to survive, and I did. I just used his resources to do it. Months passed. From what I heard through distant cousins, the fallout was catastrophic. Julian's new wife, realizing that the fountain of wealth was drying up, started arguments that led to a separation before their first anniversary. My father had to sell the family home to cover the debts he had accrued trying to maintain his image after the loss of his most valuable assets. He was forced into a retirement he hadn't planned for, in a house a quarter of the size of the one I grew up in. I don't feel guilty. Every time I wake up in my quiet apartment, free from the crushing weight of debt and the suffocating shadow of my brother, I feel a sense of peace I never thought possible. They wanted me to be the sacrificial lamb for Julian's happiness. They wanted me to suffer in silence while they basked in luxury. They forgot that the person who has nothing to lose is the most dangerous person in the room. My father spent his life collecting things because he didn't know how to value people. He thought a watch was worth more than a son's life. Now, he has neither. Julian thought he was entitled to the world because he was the favorite. Now, he's learning what it's like to work for a living, and he's failing miserably. As for me, I'm starting over. I've gone back to school for a graduate degree, and I'm paying for it in cash. I don't look back. I don't check their social media. Sometimes, justice isn't about the law. Sometimes, justice is about taking back what was stolen from your spirit. My father handed Julian $300,000 for a party, but I handed myself a future. And in the end, that was the most valuable thing in the vault. The silence of my new life is the best gift I've ever received. I spent 25 years screaming for someone to see me, to help me, to love me. It took losing everything I thought a family was supposed to be to realize that I was the only person who could save me. The debt is gone, the ghosts are quiet, and for the first time in my life, I am not the invisible son. I am the one who walked away. The collection was just metal and glass. It was cold, hard, and inanimate. My father loved it because it couldn't talk back, it couldn't fail, and it couldn't ask for help. He surrounded himself with perfection because he couldn't handle the messiness of actual human connection. He treated me like a broken piece of machinery that wasn't worth the cost of repair. He treated Julian like a luxury item that needed to be displayed. He never saw either of us as people. By selling that collection, I didn't just get money. I stripped away the armor he used to hide his own failures. I forced him to face the world without his hoard. I've heard he spends his days now looking at the empty spaces in his display cases, wondering where it all went wrong. He probably blames me. He probably tells anyone who will listen that I am a thief. But he knows the truth. He knows that he set the price of my loyalty at $0, and I simply accepted the deal. I often think about that wedding day. I think about the moment the music started and the flowers were arranged, and my father stood there knowing his empire was crumbling from the inside. I think about Julian, smiling for the cameras, unaware that his inheritance had already been liquidated to pay for my surgery and my freedom. It was a beautiful wedding, I'm sure. The most expensive funeral for a family dynamic that ever was. I am not a bad person. I am a person who was pushed to the edge of an abyss and decided not to jump. Instead, I built a bridge out of the very things that were meant to keep me down. I don't need their approval anymore. I don't need a seat at their table. I have my own table now, and there is plenty of room for people who actually care. The money is just a tool. It's the peace of mind that matters. The ability to sleep through the night without wondering if I'll have a roof over my head tomorrow. The ability to look in the mirror and know that I am no longer a victim of their favoritism. I took the power back. I took the legacy. And I turned it into a life worth living. If my father ever finds me, if he ever stands at my door and asks for an apology, I will look him in the eye and tell him exactly what he told me. Life is about hard lessons, Dad. And I hope you've finally learned yours. The world is a different place when you aren't constantly waiting for someone to give you permission to exist. I used to walk with my head down, trying to be as small as possible so I wouldn't offend the golden child or disturb the father's peace. Now, I walk with my shoulders back. I've earned my place. I've paid my dues. And I did it using the only currency my father ever respected. He wanted a grand celebration for his son. He got one. It just happened to be the celebration of my independence rather than Julian's marriage. And honestly, it was worth every single penny. I've moved on to a town where no one knows the name of my father or the exploits of my brother. Here, I am just a man who works hard and pays his bills. I am a neighbor, a friend, and a success on my own terms. The rare coins and the vintage watches are scattered across the country now, sitting in the safes of people who will actually appreciate them for what they are. They aren't symbols of neglect anymore. They are just objects. And I am just a man. A free man. Sometimes I wonder if Julian ever thinks about me. If, in the middle of his mounting debts and his failing relationships, he ever wonders where his brother went. I wonder if he realizes that the brother he ignored was the only one who actually knew how to survive. He was the one who was given everything and ended up with nothing. I was the one who was given nothing and ended up with everything that matters. The story of the golden child and the scapegoat is as old as time. But in those old stories, the scapegoat usually wanders into the desert and dies. I decided to rewrite the ending. I didn't wander into the desert. I bought the desert, sold the sand, and built an oasis. If there is a lesson here, it is that you cannot treat people like they are disposable and expect them to remain loyal. You cannot invest all your love in one child and all your expectations in another and think the balance will hold. Eventually, the scales will tip. And when they do, the fall is a long way down. My father's vault is empty. My brother's pockets are empty. But my life is full. I have found a career that I love, one that values my mind and my work ethic. I have found friends who see me for who I am, not for what I can provide for them. I have found a sense of self that isn't tied to a GPA or a bank balance. Every now and then, I see a watch in a store window that looks like one of the ones from the vault. I don't feel a pang of regret. I don't feel a rush of fear. I just smile and keep walking. Because I know that a watch can tell you the time, but it can't give you back the years you lost. I've already gotten those back. The $300,000 wedding is a memory. The $420,000 collection is a foundation. And the life I built is a masterpiece. I am no longer the invisible son. I am the architect of my own destiny. And that is a wealth that no vault can ever hold.